I texted my friend Manny. I said, "Did I ever show you this?" He said, "No bro, that looks so sweet. You're amazing with the router. And also very muscular." Okay, he didn't say that last part. So then I said, "Wait till you see what it can do." Then he said, "OMGGGGGG, show me how." So we're gonna show him exactly how we did it. For this piece, here are all the materials you're gonna need. The foundation for the whole thing is really going to be your wooden board, so you want to make sure that it fits your phone. I also bought some 2-part epoxy resin, and this is just to fill in whatever we carve out. Last but not least, you're also going to need a wireless charger. And if you're interested in using any of the stuff I used, I'll link it in the description. I started off by sketching out a few of the lightning bolt patterns that I wanted to see on the wooden board. And of course you're free to carve out whatever you'd like, but I thought the lightning bolt made the most sense since it is a charger. After a few bad sketches, I finally settled on this design, or at least its proportions. Keeping in mind that this is a 1-foot board, we can safely cut it in half. These dimensions make the most sense given the size of the phone itself and the charger. Now I'm just mapping out the center of each side, and that's so I can place the charger on one side and the lightning bolt on the other side. I made a cross in the middle by marking the halfway point between the length and the width. After that, I just centered the lightning bolt and made sure that the lightning bolt size made sense in relation to the charger. This is an important detail because placing your phone on the lightning bolt is what's going to charge it. Once you're all done with that, you can create an outline of the lightning bolt. I also filled mine in because I'm using a lead pencil, and you can imagine how easily that line would smudge. After that's all done, you can move on to the backside. Using the same method as last time, I mapped out half the length and half the width. I marked out a few other reference points and then moved on to outlining the charger, since this is the area that you're going to carve out. Next, I grabbed my router and the smallest router bit I could find. I adjusted the router's depth to about 1/8 of an inch. We're really only going to be outlining the shapes at this point, and they don't recommend that you try to take off too much at one time. Routers are one of the tools that terrify me the most, so be very careful with yours. If they can basically give the wood a tattoo, you really don't want to come in contact with the router bit. If the carving looks a little bit rough at first, that's okay because the sander will take care of it. Now we can move on to the backside. Again, I'm keeping the router at about 1/8 of an inch deep, and I'm creating an outline so that when I grab a bigger router bit, I can move along easily. After the outlines were done, I brought in the big guns. This router bit is a lot wider than the other one and can therefore take off a lot more material at once. If you have the weather for it, I would recommend doing this outside. It can get very messy indoors. Keep in mind that you want to cross-reference the depth of the router bit with your wooden piece. You want to take it in small passes while also aiming to get as far in as you can, and that's because it's going to minimize the amount of material between the charger and the phone. After that's all done, don't forget to drill into what you consider the backside. You're going to need somewhere for the cable to run through. Now that the base is all done, we can go ahead and pour our epoxy. Depending on the type of epoxy you're using, you might want to do this in a well-ventilated area. The epoxy I used was more for arts and crafts, so the fumes aren't harmful. And I know it's a little hard to see, but the epoxy comes with 2 bottles. One is the epoxy resin and the other one is the hardener. The ratio on these is 1:1, which means you have to mix equal parts for the epoxy to solidify. I didn't need much epoxy, so I just used a bottle cap to measure both parts. If you happen to be in a region that's pretty cold right now, Putting this next to the heating vents can actually speed up the cure time. Once that cured, I started by sanding the epoxy flush to the piece of wood. You should be able to start at a pretty low grit just because the epoxy is a little hard to dig through. After that, I made some pretty big incremental jumps. I went from 80 grit sandpaper to 180 to 320 to 800, 1500, and then 2000. We only worked up to 2000 to accommodate for the epoxy. We want it to be super smooth. I normally wouldn't go this high on wood, and that's because if it's too smooth, it's actually not going to soak in the stain that you put on it. But I figured since we're not staining it, we're just clear coating it, it should be fine. I ended up using Varathane's water-based polyurethane, mostly because it doesn't take anything away from the wood, it more so amplifies it. With a nice piece of wood like walnut, you want the natural color to show. This particular polyurethane gives the wood a white glow when you first apply it, but it turns crystal clear when it dries. In reality, it can take up to 30 minutes for the coat to dry and for the color to change. Lucky for you, all the clips you already saw were fast forwarded, so that half hour was really like 12 seconds of video time. But this last coat we're gonna let sit overnight. The next day, this is what we had. The only thing left to do was to check the fitment of the charger and to make sure that it's charging the device that you put on it. With these headphones, the orange dot means the charge is being received, which means we're good to go. This is going to be a gift from Annie, so I packaged everything back up and secured the charger with hot glue. On a side note, since this is a gift, that means there's no charge for Manny's charge, ironically. Well, maybe from his electricity provider, unless he has solar. But even then, I think there's a charge for those too. If you've made it this far, I honestly can't thank you enough for watching. If you like what you've seen and you want to keep seeing projects like this in the future, just take a moment to like and subscribe. After all, it only takes a second. So that's it for me. Till next charge.